Hello, my name is Amy Watson and I'm in Nerida Spina's 8 a.m. Tuesday workshop for EUN231. This year I've been fortunate enough to be part of the school readiness immersion program, heading to my host school one day a week prior to my professional experience. I was in an inquiry-based Brisbane Metro P6 primary school with a whole school approach to writing for the year. I attended their morning book club, which discussed Gail Owen's Developing Young Writers in the Classroom and Kath Murdoch's The Power of Inquiry. I was in a Year 3-4 composite class, and my supervising teacher does not teach for assessment or a mandated unit plan because she is the sole composite teacher and has a holistic approach to teaching. She has more freedom to use her professional judgment to teach students what they need to meet the achievement standards. She is also pro-asset-based instruction to create lifelong learners. And there are 21 students ranging from the age of 7 to 10 with mixed abilities in the classroom. So I conducted a writing workshop where I used an integrated approach to writing. The process-based approach, which is the writing process of pre-writing, drafting, revising, editing, and publishing. The genre-based approach, using diverse text to teach text structure and language features. And the product-based approach, teaching linguistic knowledge for their final piece. For differentiation, I adapted the low floor, high ceiling approach with no fixed outcomes. The class throughout the year is constantly working on writing stamina, but writing more does not necessarily mean better quality of writing. Some students also use school iPads, such as speech-to-text function, to assist with their writing. Direct instruction is used as it is fit for purpose, not didactic teacher-led instruction, but Hattie promotes it as visible teaching. It involves the gradual release of responsibility through a structured sequence of stages and scaffolded activities. The stages of this instruction are stating the learning intentions and success criteria, then building the field where students share their prior knowledge, which is where I conducted my diagnostic assessment about developing characters, then deconstruction of a model text, guided writing, leading to independent composition. Being an inquiry-based school, I started with an open-ended essential question about the big idea of character to stir their curiosity. My essential question was, what does a great character need? I used a split screen for the learning intention and the learning asset, or rather skill they would be using to help them with the learning intention. The learning intention is students will use descriptive language to effectively build a character describing physical description, behavior, how they act and speak, reputation, and environment and belongings. And the skill is, as communicators, how can we be helpful with our feedback to others? This skill is transferable and is part of the learning assets promoted during inquiry. By facilitating peer feedback and self-assessment throughout the learning experiences, students develop to be self-regulated learners, which facilitates growth mindset. So I needed to elicit students' prior knowledge about creating a character. They have covered characters in prior learning experiences from previous years at school. I got them to think about characters they're familiar with. I then used a visible thinking routine, GSCE, generate, sort, connect, and elaborate, a type of concept map as diagnostic assessment. I got each student to generate one thing they knew about creating a character on a post-it note and put it on the whiteboard. As a whole class, we looked at everyone's answers. I asked the class, are there any answers we could group together? One student came up and found some common answers, which she sorted into a section called personalities. Another student came up and she sorted them into appearance, and the class agreed. So to build the context about characters, I used the book we've been discussing in the morning book club by Gail Owen, which had a whole chapter on developing characters. From that book, I displayed the character framework, which uses physical description, behavior, reputation, and environment and belongings. I briefly explained each section, and the students realized that appearance came under physical description and that personalities came under behavior. So students would need to learn about reputation and environment and belongings. I handed out copies of the framework and a model text for reference to help them understand text structure. I got them to then narrow their focus to one character to write, especially loved relative or neighbor, or favorite teacher. I explained physical description using diverse texts where we looked at linguistic choices. We then deconstructed the model text against the framework. This is where students also started their pre-writing by making some jottings for their character in regards to physical description in their writer's notebooks. This stage was repeated for behavior, reputation, and environment and belongings. Before students write their first draft, the class co-constructed a checklist which helps develop metacognitive awareness for students' own learning process. Therefore, students know what to expect and could monitor their own work. My supervising teacher suggested the list be only 4 things as not to overwhelm them. The students came up with tense, the framework, precise verbs, and descriptive imagery, show, don't tell. We then deconstructed the model text using the narrative checklist to model how to self-assess students' own writing and that they should refer to the model text and framework when they got stuck. Then they were ready to write their first draft, which I would monitor, making incidental observations and giving instant verbal feedback. Then in a sharing circle, each student read out their first draft. Each time, their peers and I gave feedback and feed forward. Communicating helpful feedback links to the learning asset stated at the beginning of the experience. I took notes, which gave me data that many students didn't understand show don't tell. In fact, one student at the end of the lesson said, "Miss, I still don't understand show don't tell," which was a student voice to guide my planning for targeted intervention for a mini lesson. Students were engaged and motivated to make the necessary effort by having a growth mindset to push through as they realized it was an achievable learning challenge. Students revised and edited their work. With editing, they did a self-assessment with an editing checklist, which they tick off in the margin of their books. Then they got into pairs to read each other's character portrait and post-it notes. Each student would write one thing the author did well and one thing they could improve on, using the narrative checklist as a guide. From this feedback, students set themselves writing goals. For example, I will try and use the same tense within my writing. Students then wrote a second draft, which I collected to give written and verbal feedback. I used a pink pencil for things I was tickled pink and what I liked within their writing, and green for things that meant there was room for improvement. I signed and dated my comments and then gave individual conferences with each student to explain my comments. So I used the backward design for my planning for assessment. I clarified the design outcomes of my students doing a character portrait led by the Australian curriculum. I created my learning intentions and understanding of what transferable skills my students would acquire. I determined what evidence I needed to assist their progress. The writing process gives plenty of opportunities for formative assessment, feedback, and feed forward. I would use my content knowledge, select appropriate content, and organize that knowledge into effective teaching and learning sequences while applying effective literacy teaching strategies. To gauge students' prior knowledge, I did a diagnostic assessment where I reviewed their understanding and built the context of what they were to learn. With formative assessment, which included incidental observations, sharing circle, peer feedback, self-assessment, and individual conferences, I gauged individual students' progress and targeted instruction for gaps or misunderstandings to guide students to the learning intentions and success criteria. In regards to evidence of impact, students' initial understandings was that characters only needed appearance and personalities. Then with the explicit instruction of the character framework, student number 12's first draft included physical description, behavior, reputation, and environment and belongings. However, he was struggling with precise verbs and show don't tell. So with targeted intervention, his second draft dramatically improved with multiple examples of show don't tell, underlined in pink. Using Excel to record student data in a clear, concise way, all students in their first draft showed that show don't tell was the weakest part of their work, but with targeted instruction, improvement can be seen by almost all students. For improvements for my future practice, I would like to improve my understanding of creating achievable learning goals to gain engagement and motivate students. Also developing an efficient system to track and review students' progress to provide more timely feedback to students and to keep accurate and reliable records of student achievement. Collaborating or seeking and applying constructive feedback from supervising teachers and colleagues are always needed to improve teaching practice, as well as to engage in professional learning to understand implications to improve student learning. I would like to develop strategies to involve parents and or carers into the education process, also engaging with the wider community to develop networks to broaden my knowledge and teaching practices that I could bring into the classroom. Thank you for listening to my showcase, where I reflect my knowledge and application of teaching practices to improve student learning.